Hey, what's up? Jeff Ratcliffe here. The Philadelphia Eagles are over a season removed from their 2017 Super Bowl championship, but there's still a lot of firepower on this offense. So let's preview for 2019 fantasy football, the Philadelphia Eagles. Speaking of 2017, hey, let's talk about Carson Wentz. In 2017, this guy was a big-time breakout before tearing his ACL. Over those 13 weeks that he did play, he was a number 2 fantasy quarterback, so we know he can put up some big-time numbers in Doug Peterson's offense. Now, of course, he did get hurt last year, so injuries are a very real concern with Carson Wentz. That being said, though, he's in a position where the team doesn't have Nick Foles as a backup. It's Nate Sudfeld behind him. So the team is believing in him, and I think we should as well for fantasy purposes. The nice thing, too, about his injury pass is builds in a little bit of a discount for fantasy purposes. You'll get him a little bit cheaper than maybe you should. I think he's a nice back-end quarterback one option with much higher upside. And a big part of it is just really the surrounding cast. He's got a nice fleet of receivers. He's got multiple tight ends who can catch the ball and guys out of the backfield. So let's talk about these pass catchers here. And let's go to the tight end position because Zach Ertz came off of one of the heaviest volume seasons we've ever seen for a tight end. 154 targets on the season, 116 catches. I mean, unbelievable numbers right there from Zach Ertz. Now, that certainly keeps him in elite territory. He's right up there. He may be the second tight end taken in your 12-team PPR drafts this year. He'll be a second-round pick, very likely. Second tight end taken, maybe the third if George Kittle goes before him. But they're right neck and neck this year as that next guy after Travis Kelce. However, there are some people who are concerned by Dallas Goedert's presence on this offense. And while Goedert's gotten a lot of buzz in the offseason, Ertz has been just as good. If you look at what Philly beat writers have been saying, Ertz has been good as well. So I'm not too worried. Now, that being said, last year's volume was so high that we could see a downtick a little bit, and he could still end up being a 100-catch guy. He could be a 98-catch guy, which is going to be elite for fantasy purposes. You will see Dallas Goedert used a little bit more, but not enough to warrant fantasy consideration in normal-sized leagues. Zach Ertz, though, still elite, no doubt about it. Now, Ertz being the top target on this offense does depress the value of wide receivers a little bit, but I do think Alshon Jeffrey's going a little bit later than he should be going. And before you bombard us with comments and at me on Twitter, here's the thing. Alshon played in 13 games last year. He was the number 25 PPR receiver in 13 games played. So if he's out there for 16 games, there's enough meat on the bone, especially in the red zone of this offense, that he could easily return value. You don't even have to draft him as the number 25 receiver right now. You're going to get nice value on Alshon Jeffrey. And I know people say, oh, what about the drops? Okay, he had 5 drops last year. If you're in a league where you lose points for drops, don't draft Alshon or don't draft guys who drop passes. I don't know if any of those leagues ever existed. So the thing is, 5 drops, it's not a big number. It's not like he dropped 15 balls. I think drops are often one of the most overrated stats that people will throw out for fantasy football as an argument against a guy. I don't see the merit to it. Wide receivers are going to drop balls at times. It just happens. I know it stinks when you're a fan, but for fantasy purposes, it's not really something we should pay much mind to. And keep in mind, receivers who drop too many balls don't make it to the NFL. So I wouldn't worry too much about it with Alshon. Get him at a nice value this year. Of course, Deshaun Jackson is back in Philly. Never quite had the connection with Jameis Winston, but reports are suggesting he does have that connection with Carson Wentz. And the thing about Jackson is, yes, he's in a twilight of his career. He's well north of 30 at this point. But this dude can still run. He can still get downfield, and that obviously is good for his big play upside. He could also end up being the number 2 in this offense. Nelson Aguilar's there in the slot, but Jackson figures to be there in 2 wide sets on the outside. So it makes Jackson a sneaky guy who you should be looking at in the later rounds of your drafts. He's got some upside, some juice in this offense. There is appeal there, even though he's up there in age. Not really looking at Aguilar this year in regular-sized leagues. Just not enough targets that go around to give Aguilar week in, week out value. Going to the running backs, of course, this team did bring in, they had a bunch of just-a-guy types in the backfield last year, so they addressed the position in the offseason. They bring in Jordan Howard. So this is an interesting name, especially if you played fantasy football over the last few seasons. You know who Jordan Howard is. They also draft Miles Sanders out of Penn State. This guy was off the charts at the Combine, so something to note with him. But let's talk about Howard first and foremost. He's one of those players that for some reason fantasy players love to love, no matter what he does. This time last year, I told people that he was being overdrafted in the second round, and I got hate tweeted. So who was right? History shows I was. Not always. I'm not always right, but I will tell you I was right on that one. He finishes the number 20 PPR back despite having a lot of opportunity. And why did I say it? I wasn't saying it because I personally dislike Jordan Howard. I was saying it flat out because I thought he was a bad fit in the Matt Nagy offense. Plain and simple. That is an offense based on Andy Reid's ideas, based on the Andy Reid system, because Nagy came from there. And in that type of offense, backs who can catch the ball out of the backfield do a lot better than backs who don't. Well, Jordan Howard had 20 catches last year. We know he's not good in that area. He also was very inefficient on the ground with just 3.7 yards per carry. So he goes to Philly, and it might be a breath of fresh air. New life for Jordan Howard, right? Oh yeah, Doug Peterson kind of runs the same exact offense. So we have a problem there as well. It's the same offense. If it didn't work in Chicago, why is it going to work for Jordan Howard in Philadelphia? I'm not buying into it. I think he's going to end up being overdrafted in fantasy leagues this year. Sanders is interesting. Now, of course, as I said, tested off the charts at the Combine, very impressive numbers. But you go to Penn State where he did show the ability to be a three-down player. He was the understudy for Saquon Barkley throughout his career, then finally got the chance to play last year. He did have some issues with ball security. We know that young running backs struggle in pass protection, so he's not necessarily a slam dunk either. We're likely looking at a committee. Howard's going to get his, but not enough for you to get consistent fantasy production out of him. Sanders will very likely be used in passing down situations. We'll see him catching passes. We'll also see him in early down. This is a committee situation, though, that could be a little rough for fantasy. If you ask me if I had to choose one, I think you know who I'm going to choose, but if I had to choose one, it is Miles Sanders, but I have him outside of my RB2s, so he's outside essentially the top 25, inside the top 30, but just barely. It would not surprise me, though, given his overall skill set, if he did take that job and run with it. So he's a guy who I'm still going to throw plenty of darts at in fantasy football drafts here in 2019. You want to see where Sanders, Howard, and the rest of the Philadelphia Eagles land in our fantasy rankings? You can check those out and more at PFF.com.